start? So let's say you have a congregation that has decided that they now have a vision of community transformation that is so much larger and deeper than anything that they've had before. They don't just want to do direct service. They really want to make a difference in the level of justice in their community, in the amount of abundant life that people experience. They really want to do community development and community organizing. Where do they start? So I'm going to give you right now a standard model for doing that. Of course, as we go on through the course, you'll see that there are a variety of different approaches, but this is pretty standard and I think it's a good introduction. So let's start here. So the first 3 steps that we talk about is that you have to see what's happening in the community. And remember, we talked about that, seeing through the eyes of Jesus. We have to see what is going on in the community. Then you have to investigate, you have to go deeper, and then you have to start actually asking people in your community what they see. So just to give you sort of a general frame, there's a set of videos that I have shared with you. You can see the link. The password is capacity. These videos were put together by Professor Michael Mata. He was a professor at Fuller for many years, and now he runs a division at Azusa Pacific University and Seminary. But he calls this process that you'll see in the videos the caminata. This is the process through which a congregation begins to see, to really see what is going on in their community. So this is an important process both for people who come from outside a community and just come to church and they don't really know the community that the church is located in, but it's also an important process in many ways, even for people who live in the community. That you can be a fish in the water. The fish doesn't see the water. The fish isn't even aware of the water. And there can also be this incredibly powerful interchange that happens when people who live in a community and people who are coming from the outside go together to walk through their community, to see it as clearly as possible, to see it both in terms of its problems, but also in terms of its assets, of its beauties. There is a professor in Minnesota who calls this a beauty walk, that her students walk through the community, a community that they think of as distressed, as a community with multiple problems, and they don't just focus on the problems, but they really look for the beauty in the community. So you're looking at the problems and the needs, you're looking at the beauty in the community, you're looking at opportunities, you're looking at assets, and as you go through these videos, you'll see all the different ways that Professor Michael Manta leads members of a community, members of a church, through the community to really see. That's where you start. Now, after you see, that's going to raise a bunch of questions for you. You're not going to automatically have answers. In fact, if you do this really well, you'll have more questions than answers. So let me give you an example. We were doing a caminata with the church in their community, and we saw a bus kiosk. And in the bus kiosk, there were 2 big advertisements. One of them was an advertisement from McDonald's, and in that advertisement was a Latino family, an immigrant family, and the advertisement was in Spanish. The other sign, the other advertisement, was from the city. It also had a Latino family, but it was in English. So the question was, who are the people in this neighborhood? Are they primarily people who are new immigrants and speak Spanish? Are they primarily people that are Latino, but they speak English? So, that really led to a very interesting conversation. What are the ministry needs and opportunities in this community? Who's here? So it'll raise a lot of questions, and you'll need to investigate those questions. And you'll investigate them, as you can see, the last item on this list is an internet check, right? So you can always go to the internet and learn everything you can about the demographics of that community, which is going to help you to answer your questions. But it's not good to start by going to the internet. If you really want to see, if you really want to know, what are the needs, what are the opportunities, what is the priority in a community, if you really want to transform that community. The next step before you go to the internet, we call the neighbor survey. You go out 2 by 2, and that process is always bathed in prayer. So you get together first in the morning, you bathe it in prayer, you go out 2 by 2, very biblical, and you knock on the doors of your neighbors, but you're not there to invite them to church. That's what they expect you to do. And they may have a lot of different feelings about that. Some of those feelings may be positive, but a lot of those feelings will be, why are you invading my space? If I was interested in your church, I would have already come by. So anyhow, but you're not there to ask them to go to church. You're there to ask them what they think about what's going on in their community. What do they think the most important problems and needs are? But not only what do they think the most important problems and needs are, but what are their dreams for their community? What would they love to see? That's a much more positive impulse than just what the problems are. What would they love to see happen in their community? Then you ask them what they think the church should be doing. Well, that's always a very interesting. What do they think of the church? Do they think the church is already doing good things in their community? What would they love to see the church do? It gives you always some interesting feedback. And then you ask them what would be their potential contribution to making that dream a reality. And again, particularly in distressed communities, people are usually never asked that question. No one ever assumes that they have anything to give. But in fact, they do. And sometimes that's what we all need most, is to be seen as valuable and to be utilized. So let me just give you a little story about this that will help you have a sense of it. So I was pastoring a church that was primarily African American membership in Northern California. The community was changing and the church knew it. The community had more and more immigrants, and the church didn't quite know what to do about that. They were also in them just by themselves, even separate from that question. They had really gone through a process where they were beginning to have an expanded vision of mission. That before that they had seen mission in very narrow ways. They had seen it as saving souls. And they were really starting to see that we have a Jesus that transforms on multiple levels. So they were beginning to explore what that meant for them, but at the same time they knew that they didn't know the newcomers in their community very well. So we went out 2 by 2, and we tried to go out with somebody that spoke Spanish, at least, in every pair, because we knew that a number of the people in the community didn't speak English. Anyhow, so we knocked on a door, and a tall, thin African-American man in his 50s answered, and we said, we're from the church, and he said, what do you want? A little hostile, assuming again that the church was there because we wanted something from him, not that we wanted something for him. So we said, well, we want to be more effective in being a blessing for our community. So we want your analysis. What do you think the community needs? Well, he was surprised and he was interested, and he had a lot to say. He had a lot to say about bad kids. He said, the kids in this community, they're running wild, they're in trouble, they're disrespectful, they're up to no good, they're destructive. I think we have to do something about that. So then it was very passionate, but it was very negative. So then we said to him, well, what would be your dream? What do you think could be done? Well, then he shifted a little bit and he said, well, these kids don't have much to do. I mean, we really don't have a park around here. We don't have any activities. No wonder they're always getting into trouble. What we really need is something wholesome for the kids to do that will, help them to have relationships that are respectful with their elders. Like a basketball game, maybe like a midnight basketball game, he said. So we said, well, what do you think the church should be doing? And he said, well, you could put up a hoop at the church. There's lots of room. You have that whole little area there. He said, I've gone by it before. He said, you could do a midnight basketball game at the church, and maybe you could even have some good conversations with the kids before and afterwards and teach them some good values and introduce them to God. And you're like, oh, what do you think you would like to be part of that? Do you have anything to offer to that? It's a beautiful dream. Do you have something to offer? So he gets this little funny half smile on his face. And he goes back into his house and he comes out with a basketball. And he says, I used to play pro ball when I was young. We said, really? So then he ended up part of that project. He came over to the church. He ended up coaching the kids. He ended up part of the church, ended up coming, he always was a Christian on some level, but he ended up really becoming a disciple of Christ in the process. So that's just a little story about what it can be like to do a neighborhood survey. So you're out there and you're listening to your neighbors, and you're not just listening to their problems, but their analysis, their dreams, what they'd like to see the church do, what they might be able to contribute. But then you're going to go to another level. You've gathered a lot of important information about what you could potentially do in that community. But you don't want to assume that nothing is going on just because you haven't been doing anything or because you haven't been doing very much. Maybe God has already been at work in the community. How are you going to find that out? Well, you have to go talk to leaders. There are a variety of leaders in your community. There are leaders that are political leaders, there are council people, there are school board officials, there are business leaders. There are businesses in your community that have a definite idea themselves of what they think is going on and what they think needs to improve, particularly small businesses. There are community organizations. There are other churches. There's a variety of different leaders. There may even be coalitions that are working on different kinds of issues. Well, you need to go talk to those people, and you need to find out what is already going on. What is God already doing in your community that you could make a difference in a positive way? So when you're going to do this survey with the leaders, you're going to talk to leaders. You're going to ask them the same kinds of questions that you would ask your neighbors, but there's some other questions that you're going to ask that might have a different response than just the questions that there's information that leaders are going to have that your neighbors may not. So let me give you an example. Leaders may know something about the history of the problem. Why do we now have a bunch of kids running around the community that used to apparently have somewhere to go? What's going on? What's changed? They'll know the history of the problem. They also will know what kinds of solutions have been attempted. Have people tried to start recreation programs? Did there used to be recreation programs and the city ran out of money or reprioritized? You need to know something deeper about the history of the problem and the ways people have tried to solve it to know what solutions are appropriate in the moment. But of course, you also want to know what is being done well. What is being done currently to make a difference in this problem? Maybe there are already some programs, but maybe they serve kids a half a mile away and your kids don't know about them. So it's really important to find out what's already going on, and then to find out from the leaders where they think the gaps are. What do they think is going on that's being done well, and what do they think that nobody's doing that somebody needs to do? That's a real clue for you about where you can fit in and make a difference. And then, of course, you want to find out where there might be potential collaboration. How can you work together? How can you enter into an existing collaboration and be salt and light, bring the unique gifts of your church? Or how could you help to create a collaboration that doesn't currently exist? So let me give you again a story that will give you some kind of clear idea. So we were doing this process with a local church, and the local church is Spanish speaking. And it's a good-sized church, several thousand people. But they didn't have a lot of relationship with their community, just a little bit. They were doing some food giveaways, but not anything that really made a change in the community. So they did this process, and they walked around, and they identified resources, and they realized that just about 6 blocks away, there was a junior high school. So they decided that they would make an appointment with the principal. They went to see the principal, who is African American, and she said, "I am so glad to see you. You're from that church on the corner? I have been praying." I have been praying. She's a Christian. I have been praying for someone from that church to come and meet me, because we're very limited in how much we can proactively go out and reach out to the community. But if the community comes to us, there's a lot that we can do together. She said, the kids, a lot of our kids walk by your church every day on the way home. Wouldn't it be wonderful if you had an after-school program? We might be able to come up with some resources to help you do that. Some training, some support, some funding. Would you be interested in that? They were so amazed. It just never occurred to them in a million years that someone from the junior high would want to collaborate with them. So now we're on the same page, right? That you've done the caminata, you've looked at your community, you've seen it, Now you've surveyed the neighbors. You have a sense of their vision, where their visions overlap. And now you've surveyed the leaders. What are you going to do next? Well, you come back, you club together everybody who's been doing this exploration. And then you need to figure out, well, what do we do with all the data? Well, now you really want to ask the people in the church. They've been listening, and maybe they've heard different kinds of statements that have echoed for them, that match their own sense of what is the problem? What are their dreams? They've heard all of these different dreams. Are there dreams that they particularly resonate with, that match their passions, that they have a vision for? That's really important, because they're trying to get a sense of where God is calling them. And where God is calling us is always connected to the passions that He's given us, to the visions that He's given us. And they're also going to look at their particular gifts and resources. What gifts and resources exist in the community? In the community of the church. What does the church have? Who goes to that church? Do they have mostly elderly people that could be, mentors and elders for people in the community? Do they have a lot of young people that have a lot of energy? Who's in the community? Who's in their church? So they begin to say, what are our gifts and resources? And it's very important at that moment to see themselves through God's eyes. The Anawim, the word Anawim in Hebrew, is often translated as the poor, but it means the people at the bottom and on the edges, the marginal people. The world teaches us to see those people as not having a lot to offer, as not having a lot of gifts, as not having a lot of resources. And those people in our church often think of themselves as not being leaders and really having nothing important to contribute. But that's not how God sees it. For God, the margins are the center. The last will be first. Every single person, this wonderful story of the widow, that's why the coins are there. The story of the widow with the coin, she just had her 2 cents, but she gave it, and Jesus praises that. So we really have to learn to see ourselves with new eyes. What are the gifts and resources of some of the people we tend to overlook in the congregation, who might actually have a lot to give? So you step back with all of that, and you say, okay, so now we can overlap our passions, our visions with what we've heard and what we've seen. We can look at what our unique gifts and resources are, and we can begin to figure out our niche. What's our niche? Now, there's one more piece that you have to do in that process of figuring out your niche. There's a discernment question. Remember, you're discerning. You're not just deciding what you're going to tackle. You're discerning what you're going to tackle. So that's a lot of prayer, right? But it's not just prayer. There are a couple of tools that we use in faith-rooted organizing for this last step of discernment, because what you're trying to discern in some sense is the kairos. Remember what Mordecai says to Esther in the book of Esther. Maybe you are put in the position that you are for such a time as this. Maybe there is a particular need or a particular opportunity in your community that is more important than the others. So you have to discern, is there a kairos moment? Now, I want to translate kairos. Some of you already know what it is, all of you seminary students. But chronos and kairos are the 2 Greek words for time that are used in the New Testament. Chronos is chronological time. Yesterday, today, tomorrow. Kairos is the moment of God's intervention into human history. So there are these key moments where you can do a particular action, you can focus on a particular need, and it will be pivotal. It will open up a host of possibilities. If you had been in the state of Alabama in the United States in 1963 and you did not respond to civil rights issues, you would have missed the kairos. Because a variety of issues confronted people in small towns in Alabama and in big cities in Alabama in 1963. But they were all very connected to the question of civil rights. And if you began to approach that question, the civil rights of African Americans, it began to be a platform from which you could deal with many of the issues in the community. So you're going to try to discern the kairos. And there's a mentor of mine, Reverend James M. Lawson Jr., and you are in fact going to see in fact, I think it's next week, you are actually going to be looking at a documentary video of the work that he did in Nashville to desegregate Nashville. But he says that at any particular time and place, there are deep lies that many people believe that justify the injustice that is done in that time. And if you don't expose and combat the lies, even if you try to change the injustice, it will come back like a wart because the lies that held it up are still in place. So he says that in Nashville, when they were trying to discern exactly how to name and to shape their issue and how to go at it, the issue of segregation, which was the issue they ultimately went after, was not the most important issue for everyone. It wasn't the hottest issue. But they asked a question about the lie. They said, what is the lie that most people believe that supports and maintains the unjust structures and unjust policies in this community? They decided that the lie was the belief that some people are worth more than others, that some people are made to serve and others to be served. That was the lie, that supported slavery, that belief. So then they said, well, what is God's truth? What is the divine truth that combats that lie? And they said, in Genesis, we're all made in the image of God, equally and infinitely precious. So they said, well, how are we going to structure this work so that it exposes the lie and the truth? So they did sit-ins at lunch counters, because by having young African American and young white boys and girls, young men and women, sitting next to each other eating lunch, they really had everyone look at this question of, is one of them automatically less than the other? Or maybe they're both equally loved by God. That it really dramatically showed the lie and the truth in a way that allowed people to confront it. So the last question that you're going to ask yourself is of all of the potential problems we could take on, opportunities we could seize, coalitions we could work with, is there one of them that in some way will help to reveal the deep lie that people believe in our community, and then God's truth that would combat and overcome that lie? So that's an exercise that you can do as the last step of deciding where you want to focus. Now, after you decide, okay, this is what we're going to work on youth. And we're going to work on alternatives for youth. And we're going to work on making sure that youth have healthy activities. And maybe we're going to also look at what's happening in the schools. Let's say we're going to work on this direction, that this is really needed. Well, we still have to make a plan. We still have to go step by step. We might start with something pretty simple. We might say, okay, I think we want a basketball hoop. I think we want to start a midnight basketball game, because that's something we can do really easily. But we know we're not going to stop there. We know that we want the fullness of the transformation that Jesus wants for this community. So we're going to find out. We're going to start sending some people regularly to the school board meetings so we can sit and we can listen and we can hear about how there might be larger opportunities. If there are people working on youth issues in a coalition, we're going to come join the coalition and just, again, for a while, just sit and learn to see what we might want to do next. We're going to get to know kids as they come for our midnight basketball. And then maybe we're going to find out that there's something natural that begins to evolve from the kids themselves. Some way that they begin to dream. And they begin to dream together, and they begin to dream with us. And then the revelation begins to unfold. So we're going to create a plan. We'll create a flexible plan because we'll let it evolve. But we just really want to be clear about what are the first few steps. What is something simple and feasible we can do now? Who can we begin to work with? Who can we begin to spend time with and listen to that is going to take us step by step into a really beautiful, amazing, and powerful work. Now, before I end this, I want to say one more thing about collaboration. One of our biggest weaknesses in the church is that we can be arrogant enough to think that we can do everything on our own. We can be arrogant and mistaken enough to think that God only works through us, when in fact, God is working all the time through us and around us. And so the question sometimes is, how do we contribute to what it is that God is already doing? Not just how do we start it, like I said earlier. But in order to do that, you have to collaborate. And churches are sometimes very suspicious of collaborating with people, particularly people that are not Christian. But when you collaborate on a common goal, that's really your opportunity to build the kind of depth of relationship that is truly a testimony, where you really know people, where you really love them, where they really experience your love, and they experience the love of God coming through you. So you have to enter into a collaboration. And when you enter into a collaboration, the watchword is, how do you be in the world and not of the world? That you enter into that collaboration in a way that doesn't compromise your integrity in any way, but rather actually allows them to see through their relationship with you what it means to be a disciple of Christ. So you're part of the coalition, bringing your unique gifts. You're in the world and not of the world. So how do you do that? Well, you have to start by realizing that there are actually various kinds of collaboration that are possible. Collaboration doesn't mean necessarily complete unity. It doesn't mean that you become one organization. The simplest level of collaboration is just to find out what someone else is doing and to coordinate, so that you wouldn't have events at the exact same time. So that, if they're going to see the school board official, you should know what they're saying, so that when you go see the school board official, maybe you're both saying the same thing in different ways, and you should coordinate that. So coordination is the lowest and simplest level of collaboration. And even if you don't feel like there's enough unity of purpose to go farther than that, beginning the conversation and beginning to coordinate is already a positive step. Second level is what is normally referred to as collaboration. And that means that there are specific activities that you decide that you're going to do together. So you're going to do the midnight basketball game to start with, but there is somebody from the health department that is going to bring the health truck down, and they're going to do basic public health exams for the kids. So that's collaboration. They need to use that little public health truck to go out and do health education and some basic testing in the community. And your kids could really use a little healthcare, and they could certainly use some evaluations. So that's a collaboration. There's something you're going to do together. You bring your part, they bring their part. That's a collaboration. Now you can also go to the level beyond that, which we call coalition. Coalition means that you not only have specific activities that you do together, but you actually have a specific end goal that you're going to do together. So let's say that after working together with the kids for a while and their parents, that you can see that this school doesn't have the same level of resources as the wealthy school across town. Even though they're both public schools funded by taxpayer money, the wealthy school has new books, and they have books for everybody, and your school doesn't. So maybe you need to go to the school board and talk about that. Well, coalition means that you're going to get together with various partners, various organizations, churches, maybe businesses, various leaders in your community, various organizations. You're going to get together and you're going to say, how are we going to achieve this goal of making sure that the kids in our schools all have books and all have up-to-date books to make sure that they can learn what they need to learn? That's a coalition. So you can coordinate, you can collaborate, you can act as a coalition, and all of that is less than actually starting a common organization, which is the highest level, of course, of collaboration. But often when churches don't want to collaborate, it's partly because they think that that's the only way to collaborate is total unity. And no, there are many levels along the way that you can participate in. In fact, there are some new forms. I was talking about coordinating, collaborating, and coalition building as the standard ways that people come together. But there are actually all kinds of interesting new ways that people are coming together in the 21st century. Tables is a new formulation we formed something nationally called the Evangelical Immigration Table that had evangelical leaders completely from one end of the political spectrum to the other. We sat at a common table, we discussed our common concern. Someone would come up with a particular project, and some members of the table would work on it, and other members wouldn't. So we sat at a table together for dialogue that produced some common work among some of the partners without necessarily involving everyone. That's a new formulation. There are all kinds of loose networks of ongoing communication that are not necessarily communication that's acted on, but at least we keep each other apprised. At least we have a clearinghouse where everyone in the network knows what everyone else is doing. There are platforms. That's a social media form of networking. And there are Facebook groups. So, I'm not even stopping there. I'm sure there are things you can do with Twitter and Tumblr that I don't do because I'm a little old. But there are all different ways now of working together that are very diverse. And you have to decide what makes most sense given what you're trying to achieve, who your partners are. Now, whichever way you're going to work with other people, you have to build trust. When you come in, you don't trust each other yet. You're suspicious of them quite often. They're suspicious of you. You come in with prejudices about each other. And you really need to figure out ways that you can work together that begin to overcome those prejudices. So don't say, well, they should welcome us. Well, if they've had bad experiences with Christians, they're not going to welcome you. You're going to need to come in and you're going to need to do some real work together on the ground. Maybe even some work that requires some real sacrifice that begins to help you to understand these people really do care about the same people I care about. They want the same abundant life for these people that I do. When you begin to recognize that about each other because you work together in the trenches, that allows for a lot more room to do things differently. So you find out first, where can you actually agree? And then you begin to work together in creative ways where you might contribute something different than other groups do. You might bring prayer. You might have different talking points that you bring to the school board. There's a variety of ways that you might do things very differently that really contribute our unique gifts as the church. But you have to start out by doing something you can do together that really builds trust. And then you really have to negotiate. Okay, we're going to come to the school board, but when we come up and take the microphone, we're going to pray. How do you guys feel about that? Then you begin to negotiate it. This is the contribution we want to bring. And maybe we can be part of this activity and we can't be part of that. All that negotiation can happen easily once you've got a base of trust. It's very important in that process to also understand that there are actually organizational and sectoral cultures. So very often community organizations are operating on a schedule set by the deadlines of public decision makers. So there's an election cycle, there are deadlines happening yesterday, tomorrow, policies that have to be submitted or not submitted. The church doesn't think in weeks, the church thinks in centuries. So we have a very different timetable. Someone comes to you and they say, there's a school board meeting Tuesday night. And we say, well, we have plans at church for the next 6 months. Oops, that's a little conflict. But it's not a real conflict. It's not a conflict of values. It's a conflict of culture around time. So to really begin to pay attention to what is our culture in the church. How do we tend to deal with different kinds of how do we deal with time? How do we deal with resources? How do we deal with decision making? What do we express and not express? What kind of language do we use? To really understand what's our culture as an organization. What is the culture of the organization we're partnering with? So that we don't demonize each other or misinterpret each other. We just begin to say, oh, I understand. I understand why you do it like that. This is why we do it like this. Where can we find some common ground? In a way that is in the world and not of the world. So I've just given you a little taste. I would say it's a little taste. I've given you an initial understanding of the process that a church might go through to get to the point where instead of just being in a community, or even the next step of being for a community, the church actually becomes a vital force working with the community for God's greater purpose. Thank you.